I'm going to make them no matter what because I have to, but there's so much that I get from having other people see and respond to them. It's part of the work. I've always felt like I just want to be part of the conversation, you know, like in a bigger way. Like I want to participate in talking about ideas and putting work out into the world that people get something from. This whole narrative about the needlework and textiles, that kind of domestic labor being something that was women's domain. I have a different perspective on it. If we're going to do the binary thing, I'm going to assert we know so much more. We're so much more evolved. We're so much more tuned into our emotions,
and
hormones.
Such qualities somehow are considered inferior in the patriarchal narrative.
The story, the narrative of who made the work, what it's about, it kind of eclipses just what the work is. You fade out and people stop thinking as much about your relevance until then you get to an older age where then you're like the old woman who's still at it, you know, like then despite the odds, she's still making her art. So let's give her the attention she deserves. So there's, you know, I'm cynical because
we all are.
作为今年在国家美术馆和威尼斯双年展参展的艺术家，在我联系 Liz Collins 的时候，他在 Candice Maddy 画廊的个展刚刚开幕。显然，这是属于 Liz 的一年，但这早已不是他职业生涯的开始。光是从 RISD 研究生毕业，成立他的先锋时装品牌，到今日，这已经是第25年了。在历经了一系列挫折之后，一个纺织艺术家寻获了他的成功。这是《纽约时报》上一篇关于他报道的标题。纺织或 textile 在我看来是个非常特殊的媒介，它不像绘画，一早便有了关于艺术的潜台词，关于它之为艺术，关于它为存在而存在的共识。但纺织却截然不同，因为它无处不在，我们一直对它怀有功能或用途的预期。在过去，我们在物质匮乏中缝补，或是今日物质虽丰沛了，但精神世界的萎靡中，我们寄托于时尚来拼凑缝补一出个人宣言，于是背负着历史，无处不在，早已被视为寻常的布料织物，此刻便需要穷尽视觉的可能，以某种极致去说服他为何没能服从大众认知的分配，拒绝服务于某种具体的诉求，而只作为自我存在。某种程度上，他正如 Liz 本人，在作为一名极具才华的年轻独立设计师成名后，却转而在这媒介本身找到了意义。他曾与另一名设计师合作，以七宗罪为理念创作了 Pride Dress， 四分五裂的国旗被他以针织温柔地缝合在一起，裙摆拖曳在地上。时值伊拉克战争，他尖锐的质疑披着爱国主义的外衣下霸权与暴力的实质。他也曾带领周围一众创作者，在美术馆、文化机构或是草坪上共同织就合作出了 Knitting Nation 纺织国度。一反艺术在当下对于个人主义的过度渲染，或是政客对于政绩的夸夸其谈和那些从未兑现的承诺，他揭示出正如他曾置身其中的服装行业本身，那些被匿名的成千上万个体经年累月的劳作和奋斗，才是撑起一个国家的力量和底气。最后，我想回到《纽约时报》的那个标题，作为大众媒体，面对想要看见动人故事的受众，《纽约时报》的标题暗示了艺术家就该依托于某种时运和成功的策略，但在我看来，他仅仅是在对艺术的坚守中等来了属于他的观众。
You made this dress, Pride dress. So do you consider it a work of art or it's more like a design?
The Pride dress came out of a particular project that I was doing with another designer named Gary Graham. We met and we became fast friends, and we were doing kind of the same thing at the same time with our independent businesses, and we really bonded, and we wanted to make clothing as an art project that was non-commercial, to kind of get away from the little bit of a trap that we felt we were in with the business and just trying to survive as independent designers.
For the sake of being instead of for the sake of use.
Yes. And so the Pride dress was part of a Grizz project that was based on the 7 deadly sins. That was in 2002 or 3, and I think the Iraq War was already underway, and there was a lot of problematic patriotism in the US. And an artist friend of ours gave us these old American flags. They were vintage flags. So for the pride, you know, the 7 deadly sins, gluttony, sloth, greed, lust, all of that, pride, we decided to make a dress out of the American flags where they would be chopped up, which is kind of technically illegal, or like you're not supposed to do that with the American
Right.
flag. It's a sacred
Right.
object.
I think it's the same everywhere.
Yeah. So you're not supposed to deface or destroy
Right.
that kind of object. So that was part of the gesture, was, you know, doing that out of an anger towards the government, towards the military, towards patriotism, but then like lovingly putting it back together while having it drag on the ground, which is also something you're not supposed to do, but just putting it back together, but with a kind of violence and like these veins pulsing through it. And so Gary really designed the kind of form, like the tailored form, because he's so good at that. And I designed the way that we put it together. And
Neat grafting.
yeah, yeah. And that dress is really having a moment now because it's in this traveling show called Woven Histories, Textiles and Modern Abstraction. So it's on view. It was at LACMA and now it's at the National Gallery in DC. That same place where I went as a 12-year-old and saw a lot of incredible art. So my work, that dress and several other works are in that show that's traveling around.
I also saw this work. I think the name is Walking Wound.
Walking Wounded, yeah.
Yeah. Which show was it in?
Well, right now it's in that same show,
The Woven
Woven
History.
Histories show, yeah.
Is it like a collaborative piece where people in that space can ask for a little wound on their clothing?
Yeah, yeah, you got it. Yeah, I mean, the piece was part of a performance thing that I did that was part of a bigger project that another artist organized. It was a public art project in San Francisco. And so the artist, Sonny Smith, invited people to come up with some kind of character, who they would be, and what would you sell in this one-day event. I came up with the Walking Wounded as my character because at that time it was like a later, you know, years had gone on and I had other kinds of emotional stuff I was dealing with, like I was going through a divorce, and also just I had a kind of traumatic childhood. Like I was talking about trauma, but also kind of trying to make light of it through. I was reading something last night. Someone said that there's an equation about comedy: truth plus pain equals comedy. So I think that's a relevant, like rather than making light of trauma and pain, it's like how to deal with it. And so this idea that there are people, like we're the walking wounded, in some ways we all are, right? Like everyone has wounds, so we're all walking around with some kind of deep wounds and scars. And so the idea that, I mean, I had already figured out how to cut open fabric, attach through this knit grafting, like make things that look like wounds on fabric. So, oh, well, what if I extended that? Because I had done it in my fashion stuff, like these shirts that had slashes on them, so it looked like a giant hand would like scratch somebody. So why not do that as like a service, so that people could have some kind of decorative wound put onto their clothing? They could pay like $5 for one or $10 for two, like that. Make it like a product that you could buy wounds and have them put on, so it would be like a badge, you know, like, hi everybody, I've got this wound. So it was a performative project, and the piece that I made as the like menu, I mean, that piece is a menu for people to choose. That had a life after the whole performance thing, and a lot of art historians have picked up on that piece as a very important piece. Like Julia Bryan Wilson used it as the end piece in her book Fray about textiles and politics, and then Lynn Cook has picked up this piece. It seems to resonate.
Something more about how weaving, knitting, and dealing with fabric is a powerful practice is that at the same time, it requires you being really creative, being daring about dealing with it. But on the other hand, it requires you to be disciplined because it's simple gesture pushed to an extreme. It starts with warp and weft, pushing it to an extreme, so it forms a certain visual, certain even it has a body. It mimics human lives. So I think that's why it's so powerful to me. I don't know.
It's great.
Just my contemplation on such practice.
Yeah, I get so much out of that.
But you're the one who inspired me about all of these thinking.
I mean, that's what art does, right? Yeah. You know, we have this expression, if the tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? I mean, I can use that with these artworks. Like, I'm going to make them no matter what, because I have to, but there's so much that I get from having other people see and respond to them. I think it's part of the work.
Right.
Sure, there are artists. I mean, we look at all of the self-taught artists. Like, think about like so many artists who worked in whatever kind of confines, not really trying to have people see it. You just have to make it. I have to make it, but I do want people to see it because I'm interested in human engagement and relationships and conversations. Like, before I was having as much visibility with my work, and even when I was doing fashion, I always felt like I just want to be part of the conversation, you know, like in a bigger way. Like, I want to participate in talking about ideas and putting work out into the world that people get something from. You know, like, I like the idea of my artwork being in someone's home where they see it every day and they feel something from it, like pleasure or excitement, or just like, yeah, there you are again. That, I love that pattern. It makes me feel happy. There it is. Yeah, I mean, museums are great too. Then it's like this other kind of exchange, a visit. And then if you remember it, you're lucky, you know? Or the artist is lucky that it registered. Like, when you talk about what it makes you think about, and even the fact that you've gone and done all of this great research, like you've done your homework, which people don't always do in these kinds of situations. And I just love to hear your impressions, what it makes you think about, how it makes you feel. And with fabric, people have so many associations. Right. Because from the day you're born, you're engaging with some kind of textile, and they were surrounded in all of these different ways. Culture, history, traditions, you know, ritual, all of it.
And also sometimes, maybe it's because it's too ubiquitous, then we kind of take them for granted.
Exactly.
We ignore, we overlook their beauty.
Right.
And overlook the beauty of making them.
It's true. Yeah, that's part of the problem. And fashion is a big problem there about that. And I think, you know, manufacturing in general, that whole, I mean, that's a particular interest of mine. And when I was a professor, I used to teach a seminar class to students in all different disciplines of art and design about manufacturing and production and those realities, and like how it's not just a bunch of robots in a factory. Like, factory doesn't mean that there aren't humans there. It's all run by humans, and how many people touch a thing before it's finished. And there's a lot of care and skill that goes into making things that is taken for granted. And I mean, that goes back to what I'm talking about with the rug.
Yes.
And how much care and skill and time and attention and materials is put into something like that.
And it's so anonymous.
And yeah, and then, oh, it's just a rug.
Yeah.
Why, oh, this one person made this painting and they're so important and they spent whatever time they did on it. Who cares how much time they spent on it? It's just because they're who they are, and there's just one of them. And yeah, I think I'm very challenged by that kind of imbalance, I think.
Is it in the same spirit that you decide to make the Knitting Nation series of work?
Yeah, that was all about that, like showing the labor behind the work. I mean, that project was very didactic. I wanted to lay bare labor. You know, like, here it is. This is what people do behind the scenes, like this laborious, physically demanding kind of dance of the body with material and equipment.
Does it have anything to do with gender and how knitting and weaving are considered a not so serious practice in arts?
This whole narrative about the needlework and textiles, that kind of domestic labor being something that was women's domain. I have a different perspective on it. Yes, I agree with the kind of gendered things in a way and how it's seen as lower. I've never seen it that way because I learned from participating in industry.
Right.
And even actually one of my first examples of weaving was watching men weave kente cloths. African Art Museum, seeing a film about the weaving of kente cloths, and only men weave those. Then going to factories and seeing like a lot of the textile work done by men. So I came up into this world of making textiles with a very different perspective on gender. It's not that I disagree, it's just that I feel differently about it. And frankly, I think I'm tired of the whole women's work thing.
Right.
You know, because it's like, do you really understand the bigger, like the global supply chain and how many people of all genders are involved in these processes? So it's a complicated subject, I think. And then, you know, in later years, the gender got more fluid, and so I had more people working with me who were genderqueer or non-binary. And, you know, when gender starts to kind of get into a different zone of less binary, then the conversation changes. Right. Yeah.
It's more focusing on the collective labor behind this industry, behind this practice, right?
For sure. Well, when I was younger, I used to want to work in film because I love the idea of people being able to create something incredible together that one person could never create. That collective labor in service of some kind of magnificent work. And that happened for me in fashion, like being able to have fashion shows where there's all these people, like the makeup artist doing her job and the hair person and everybody doing their incredible skill to make this beautiful world. So with Knitting Nation, it came out of that kind of work. Like I did that soon after I stopped doing fashion.
Right.
Like it was the same set of skills, and I love that idea of collective labor. And it also, in my mind, had some kind of connection to the military.
Yeah, that is a really interesting aspect to me. You use a lot of military vocabulary in that work.
Yeah.
Muster.
Yeah.
And mapping.
Yeah. In the Army.
Yeah.
Well, my father was in the Navy. By the time I was born, he was a captain in the Navy. You know, he was a naval officer and then started working in the Pentagon as an engineer. And so I grew up with a somewhat of a kind of military influence, but I also loved uniforms. Like I mean, clothing does so much, doesn't it? So a uniform communicates so many things, and that's fascinating to me. So I wanted to have this kind of like connection to labor, that kind of organized, unified thought and action.
I think in terms of narrative, it's a really rich work. To me, it definitely talks about gender issues and how women's labor are overlooked. And especially right now in this industry, I have a lot of friends who work in the gallery and they're always underpaid. They're really good looking. They're considered empty-headed. It talks a lot about things that I personally feel relevant.
There are just so many issues about a hierarchy
Yeah.
of existence. I actually think that women are more powerful and more stronger. If we're going to do the binary thing, I'm going to assert that we know so much more. We're so much more evolved. We're so much more tuned into our emotions, and
Yeah.
we're so much more easily able to be compassionate,
Yeah.
and if that boils down to biology or
And such
hormones.
qualities somehow are considered inferior in
Right.
the patriarchal narrative.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought it up. I wrapped up the Knitting Nation project in 2016, but it's coming back maybe next year because I'm doing a mid-career retrospective.
Right.
And so I think we might do a big revival.
And I think right now it's weird time to me. I think suddenly gender issue is something we talks about a lot, but it's only for the sake of gender, and it's only for the sake of identity.
On the story, right?
Yeah.
The person who made the thing.
The
and
narrative.
It's really tedious, I think. I had an experience recently where I was walking through an art fair and I saw something that was really compelling, a textile work that I was very drawn to, and I started talking. I just said, "Oh, I love that." And the person in the booth started telling me a long story about where that person found the material and how they dyed it. This long story about them, this person and their process. I want to just look at the work. I didn't ask to be told how it all came about. I understand in that kind of market context, but it's what you're saying, the story, the narrative of who made the work, what it's about, it kind of eclipses just what the work is. And let me have my own associations with this. Maybe I don't want to know so much about, but that's part of the sales thing now. And I could say maybe people are not as excited about my work because I'm a middle-aged white lesbian from New York. You know what I mean? In some ways that could be exciting to someone, but way less exciting than other categories because I'm a woman, of a certain age. I'm in that zone where you get into invisibility. It's something that happens in the natural progression of the hormonal life of a female-bodied person. You get into a zone where you start to feel invisible.
I think that artist actually tapped on this. Hito Stereo.
Yeah.
She made this video. It's called How Not to Be Seen.
Right.
And there's one method is that being a woman over a certain age, then you become invisible.
That's right. You do. In some ways, it's funny, when I turn 45, I dye my hair blue so I can, stay visible, maybe? That wasn't a conscious choice, but, you fade out and people stop thinking as much about your relevance until then you get to an older age where then you're the old woman who's still at it, then despite the odds, she's still making her art. So let's give her the attention she deserves. So there's, I'm cynical because
we all are.
Yeah, because you see it, you watch these things happen, but it's all okay because I think things are changing. People do care more about the work of artists of a certain age. We are all speaking loudly, so it's okay. I'm not gonna succumb to these patriarchal ideals. You see them, they're persistent, they're to be reconciled. It's reckoned with, but we have to go on. Kani shu yo tai du.